Barry Dennis, your host, and with me on my left is
John McKeon.
And we have a special guest today. Christy's out of town, so my father's stepping in with some interesting viewpoints and some wisdom. Here's my dad.
Larry Dennis, Sr.
So I heard some news recently that, I don't know, it's a type of thing that I'm not sure if I believe it because it's so outrageous. And
A lot of outrageous things going on out there.
yeah, but it seems really amazing. I just wanted to run this by everyone and just get your thoughts. But I mean, I suppose it could be true because the Brookings Institute was behind it.
I trust them.
They're very well respected as a think tank, and they came out with 3 things after a lot of study that they say will keep just about anyone from falling into poverty. Here's the 3 things. And they said that if you do these things, there is a 2% chance that you would be in poverty.
Almost impossible.
Almost impossible, that's what they said. There is a 74% chance that you will live in the middle to upper middle class.
Wow.
Number 1, graduate from high school. Number 2, don't have children until you're married.
Yeah, all right.
Or, in a committed relationship, a supportive relationship. And then get a job.
Any job.
Any job.
Right.
Any job. Like
Okay.
even
Big ditches.
dig ditches or McDonald's or whatever.
Okay, right.
Whatever it is, even at minimum wage, because the one part of their point is if you do that when you're young, you do it, you will work your way up.
But Barry, I want a corner office right now. I don't want to go to McDonald's.
But here's another part that they found is that these 3 steps apply to every race, every ethnicity, every corner of this country. So Ron Haskins, who is a co-author of the study, said he believes it's very clear that personal decisions and responsibility trump anything the government could ever do. That just seems outrageous to me.
Of course.
The government can't fix it with it.
No, why can't the government? Don't we want to? Shouldn't we be spending tons of money on people who?
We are.
I was wearing a t-shirt the other day that said, less government equals more freedom. And a guy came up to me and said, but not without personal responsibility.
That's true. He's right about that.
He is right.
He is right. He's 100% right.
So he wrote this. He went on to say this: the Occupy movements and other domestic problems continue to stimulate lots of talk about the lack of opportunity in America, and federal and state social programs continue their slow progress toward effectiveness. It seems timely to emphasize the role of personal responsibility in the fight to promote opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So that means no entitlement.
Yeah, it does seem timely to
Right.
do
Personal
that.
responsibility goes counter to entitlement.
Yes, it does.
Or a sense of entitlement.
It seems to.
That someone else is responsible for my welfare.
By existing, it's up to the rest of society to take care of me. Where personal responsibility says, I'm going to step up, finish high school, not get pregnant, and get a job.
But why should everybody have to do that?
Right?
I'm serious. But
Maybe
here he goes on. This is outrageous what he says. Without a relentless emphasis on personal responsibility, the billions of dollars we spend on government programs will continue to produce mediocre results, and opportunity in America will continue to stagnate.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious to me what he's saying is true, and yet somehow we require studies to prove it. It seems obvious to me.
Well, does opportunity stagnate, or is it the lack of personal responsibility in taking that upon yourself to take advantage of that opportunity?
And he goes on to say here that it's important that he's saying here that parents and education, the education system itself, should emphasize this.
Personal responsibility.
Yeah, and these three things.
Right, yes.
Instead of emphasizing other ideas like why can't everybody do this, or most people.
Mm-hmm.
I
I like what he's saying, and I agree with what he's saying, and I've always believed what he's saying.
He said that those who violate these 3 simple steps had a 76% chance of living their life in poverty.
A 76% chance.
Yes, and only a 7% chance of living in the middle class.
Wow.
That maybe maybe our educational system, our support system, as he's suggesting and as we're saying, should be emphasizing, get your high school diploma and get a job. And as we know, I'm not sure, I think perhaps we know that the minimum wage issue in the state of Oregon and Washington, more exacerbating and even greater, is leading to fewer young people getting jobs. It's very difficult for a small business which will employ young people to pay these young folks the amount of money that the government is requiring that we pay them.
I saw a great commercial. There's a robot hanging a guy out the back of a fast food restaurant, and the kid's holding up a sign that says $15 an hour, and the robot's kicking him out.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly, well, of course, I love that. I can see it. I love
That sounds
it.
just mean to me. Shouldn't everybody be paid a living wage? I mean, at least $30. No, it's like $30 an hour. What's wrong with that?
Well, to your point.
Why shouldn't everybody be paid $25 an hour at least?
Well, at least, I'm sure.
I want an answer.
Because young people, in their first job, and this is the path toward them breaking out of poverty, or could be, according to the Brookings study, McDonald's, Subway, whoever, the hardware store that I worked in from the time I was 16, isn't going to pay that young person $15 to learn how to show up on time, to learn how to tuck in their shirt,
That's a good
to
point.
learn how to.
So it's almost like really cheap. It's almost, so what you're suggesting is that getting a job for minimum wage or whatever is almost like being paid to learn
It is being paid to
more
learn.
responsible and a good employee and all that stuff.
To learn how to be on time,
To be on
learn how to
time
show up
and-
as I've agreed to show up, and so on. And so if the employer is being forced by the government to pay a wage which is impossible to pay and make a profit, they're not going to do it. And so McDonald's every day finds ways to employ more and more and more robots.
Right, automation.
No,
There's a counter.
yes.
There's a pilot where they have a counter where they don't have a person that greets you and takes your order. You go up and you poke in what you would like in the terminal, and that goes back to the kitchen, and they prepare it. They've taken away those frontline people.
Sure.
Those jobs are gone.
Yeah.
Well, that is true. I mean, there's absolutely, we'll do a whole tipping points on this at some point, and that's the concept of automation. I've done a lot of study into it, and there's no doubt from my study that automation will take all those jobs
Yeah, it will.
in a second if that gets too high. Imagine if there was a class called the 3 Steps to Success in America, and they emphasized this study, and they talked about personal responsibility, and they gave examples, and you read, maybe you part of the curriculum could be reading some biographies about people who were successful and where they started and how they got there. It seems like that would be a really powerful class in high school.
I think it's what you're suggesting is a great idea. And our schools used to teach that. McGuffrey's readers and other readers used to teach that. And what's happening today, from what I know about it, is that parents are endeavoring in some cases to teach their kids to be responsible and so on. They're getting the exact opposite in the schools. In our schools, I shouldn't say the schools, in our schools, where they're actually being taught that somehow you're a victim. Somehow society is trying to take advantage of you. Somehow there's a conspiracy actually to work against your success. And it's all a force out here somewhere that it's almost unfair.
It seems like that, because I've done a lot of teaching in my life, and some of those things, one of the great teachings that I've taught in the spiritual teachings in church, these kind of things, is never to play the victim. That's one. I feel like that's a theme coming up here. And the other one that constantly comes up all the time is personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And it seems like these things line right up with that. But on the other hand, one could say this isn't very compassionate.
Well, yeah. And of course, government can never be compassionate. And that was I think that's a tripping point, not a tipping point that we fell into very unfortunately in our languaging sometime 10 years ago or whenever it was. Individuals can be compassionate, and individuals I think we are called to be compassionate. It's the most important thing we can do as individuals. When the government gives money away, which is your money, which they've taken from you by force of gun, by the threat of gun.
Now, what do you mean by taking you by the threat of gun?
Well, what I mean by that is that they take from us in taxes, direct and indirect taxes, and those direct taxes in particular, and we wrote at our house this week a big check, and we had to, after we'd written that check, we had to run around and take money out of other accounts to cover that check which we had written, or those checks which we'd written to the state of Oregon and the United States of American Treasury.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do that because I felt I needed to do that or wanted to do that. I did that because if I didn't do that,
You go to jail.
I would go to jail. They would lock up our bank accounts, and we would run the risk of going to jail. And the penalties, by the way, are just unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
If we don't pay it on time, they're unbelievable.
It's like a payday loan.
Yeah, exactly. It's far worse than a payday.
Right.
Well,
that's only 155%.
Yeah. Is that a fact?
Oh, it's something like that a year. Yeah.
Well, I've often wondered that, or thought about, like, if we rely, I've often wondered from a perspective of personal responsibility, or in a spiritual sense, these kind of things, if we begin to rely on somebody else or something else to do what we think is good works in the world, maybe it robs us literally of the opportunity to do what we should be doing in the world.
Well, yeah.
And we've trusted somebody else to do it, and they're not going to do it necessarily in the way that we want it done. Would that be true?
Well, that's absolutely true, and it's a major challenge in our society today that somehow I feel that I'm compassionate if I support some form of government which is going to, in fact, give things to people they need and take care of people and so on. That's offloading my responsibility, and particularly if I'm offloading it to others who I think should be paying more in taxes or should be providing more services and so on.
Well, what I hear you saying is that I am not able to make good choices. If I had that money to distribute on my own, I would not be able to make proper choices. Only the government or some other entity can make those choices for me.
Yeah, maybe it's a problem in the world that for some reason we've come to believe that the government's wiser or better than we are as individuals.
Well, that may be it. Yeah, and I'm really convinced that so many folks who are looking for the government to be compassionate, if you will, are looking for the government to take care of all of the problems in the world, feel that I am a good person because I want the government to do it. So
Right.
it's offloading, in a sense,
Right.
my moral responsibility versus my finding a way to be involved in the soup kitchen, finding a way to be involved in the community, finding ways to tithe, or in other ways, give to those charities which I support, which I know are doing good work. And history is replete with, if you go back into the 30s and back into the 20s and earlier on, there were all kinds of societies in the United States of America, volunteer societies, which took extraordinary good care of those people who were sick or in some other way unable to take care of their families.
They weren't governmental agencies.
They were not governmental
local
agencies.
churches,
Exactly.
local charities.
The associations of varying kinds.
Uh-huh.
And when you came to the association and you said, I'm sick and I can't work and my family needs, they would give you money. And they would watch you.
So that sounds a lot more efficient.
They would watch you.
So if I have an agency that is charged with taking my money so that the government can distribute it how they see fit, it seems like a tremendous bureaucracy and very inefficient. And there's a huge overhead involved with that.
It's a huge overhead, and it becomes very self-sustaining.
Yeah.
There's a bureaucracy created there, which is ultimately more important to those who are administering that than it is those they're administering to, their clients, if you would.
So it sounds like the cop criminal thing, where if there weren't any criminals, we wouldn't have any cops. There have to be criminals so that we can have cops.
There is that. There is that element of it. There's absolutely that element of it, and we should never lose sight of it. But as you know, Barry, by any definition of poverty, I grew up in poverty. There's no other way to define or to characterize the state of my childhood.
Yeah.
And I never for us, as I've thought about that, I've never for a second blamed society, felt that there was something wrong with society, felt that there was something that needed to be fixed out there. It never even occurred to me. I somehow knew that others were doing better, lots better, than my little family was doing, my two brothers and I. But I didn't project. And
Well, it's interesting you say that, because today the government would be happy to tell you that
there's no doubt
they're
about it.
responsible for your success.
Yes, I know that. And if I got an idea that if I had heard that, I would have believed it.
Right.
I would have begun to believe it. But it's
Right.
not something that I heard. And for reasons that I don't quite understand, I knew that if there was a conspiracy in the world, it was a conspiracy for my success, not a conspiracy for my
The
failure.
land of opportunity.
That there was, yes, I believe that.
Right.
And I just knew somehow.
Whoa. When my father said that he felt like the world was conspiring, that there was a conspiracy for his success, for his goodness, that this country was conspiring for his goodness, that the world was conspiring for his goodness. I mean, think about that for a minute. That seems to go very contrary in a lot of ways to what we're hearing in the world today. But now we have to take it even further, because you have to put yourself in my father's shoes for a minute. You see, he mentioned he was poor. That's barely scratching the surface. When my father was a child, his father left the family and left him in charge with two younger brothers and his mother, and they were so poor that at times they had almost nothing. For example, there was a time when they lived in a barn with no electricity and no running water. Okay? You want to talk about being poor. Now, how many people do you think today would say to you, if they had no electricity and no running water, that they felt that somehow the world they lived in, if they just lived the right way, was conspiring for their success? Probably very few. So don't miss part 2 of this incredible Brookings Institute study. Have you heard of this in the news? This is incredible news. This is empowering news. This is great news for everybody. It's so empowering. But also what this brought up for me is what we call here at Tipping Points, we call it an uncomfortable truth. So hold on for the uncomfortable truth. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Brookings Institute showed that the study and what it showed was colorblind. Completely. It didn't matter what your race is, what your ethnicity is, what your background is, where you started in life. None of that mattered, which created for me an uncomfortable truth, because it made me question something that's a big topic today, which is called white privilege. Now, I have lived my whole life with what's called white guilt. Feel guilty for being white. But I had to question, this study made me question white privilege and my white guilt, but I don't want to give up my white guilt. There's a part of me that likes the fact that I feel so guilty and shameful for being a white male. Because a part of me gets to go, yeah, I don't deserve it. I don't deserve what I have. I haven't earned what I have. I got it because of white privilege. And I get to play the shame, guilt, hero, and virtue signal. But maybe I don't have to feel so, maybe I shouldn't feel so shameful. Maybe I shouldn't feel so guilty. Maybe white privilege isn't as big a monster as we think it is, and maybe all the guilt and shame I've been feeling my whole life, maybe I shouldn't be feeling all that guilt and shame. I'm not sure. let's continue looking at this study, and we'll continue with that idea as we move along. But don't miss part 2 of this Brookings Institute and hear more stories about how the universe is conspiring, this country and where we live, and how lucky we are to live here, and the world is actually conspiring for our success, even if you live without electricity and water, running water. So I hope you like what you've been hearing. Make some comments. If you have any ideas for other topics that we can cover at Tipping Points, put your ideas down, push subscribe, and we'll see you with part 2 next week.